And hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Tectonic Lounge. Today, we are stepping outside of talking with tech folks, but we're going to talk to somebody who is very tech friendly. This is our guest, Greg. Hi, Greg.
Hey, Serge, good to see you again.
So, Greg is an attorney, and he's also a founder of a legal tech startup called Made It Legal, and we've been involved in that for several years. And Greg and I are going to talk a little bit about where technology and law intersect. Tell us a bit more about what you've been up to, Greg, these days.
Sure, yeah. So I'm based in Canada, of course, as we joke about from time to time, and I work mostly with tech companies. So I'm working a lot on the intellectual property side of all things software and SaaS and now AI. And I'm also a privacy lawyer, so I'm working on that. And as you mentioned, not to keep life uninteresting, I decided I'd try my hand at being a tech founder as well. So uh, that's in a nutshell what I've been up to in the last little bit.
So just so we get you correctly here, you're saying the job of a lawyer is too easy. You need to add a tech entrepreneur to your to-do list and decided to do a startup, right?
That's right. I don't think anybody goes into law because they love themselves. So, you might as well add some more onto the pile.
Right. Too much time for golf, not enough time for work. So he decided to do a startup. So one of the things we talk about in general is legalese matter. And especially if you're a startup, you should be paying attention to your contracts. You should be paying attention to what you're signing. It all matters. So you were mentioning a situation where somebody puts in something in the contract where payments are due in certain ways, or if they do something this way, or they can only do business exclusively and limit themselves in the way the company can grow, right?
Right. Yeah. We see that all the time in various contracts. We were even talking just at the beginning before getting online here about things that even in banking contracts, which is not a technical thing. We're not talking about AI even, but there's certain clauses in there where you need to look out for, and they can have restrictions on how you do business. So one, talking about startups, especially when they go get their first round of financing, which is often bank financing. Uh, we'll see that sometimes where if a company takes out a loan from bank ABC, uh, there can be a clause in there that says by taking out a loan, you're agreeing only to do banking with that bank, as an example. That's one that I just came across last week, and it's one that I've seen numerous times. So it's those sorts of clauses that you need to watch out for, in addition to all, the big hot topics that everybody's talking about today with AI and privacy. But as you put it well, the gotcha clauses are still something you need to look for, even in the non-technical sense.
Okay. Well, you mentioned a couple other things, and I want to dig into a little bit into the privacy. I wanted to explore this thing. I think everybody's used to now coming to a website and ask you, do you accept these cookies? And we're not going to get into what a cookie is. And, there was a battle about third-party cookies dying or not. That's a whole other conversation. But at some point, my personal feeling is that there's a loss of value and everybody's just accepting this and we don't really understand what are the implications. But as a business person, what are the legal things you should be considering when dealing with privacy on the websites and how you manage that relationship with a customer, with a vendor, with partners that involves the privacy of the user and the data being collected? What are some of the things for business leaders that they need to be aware of when they're dealing with these privacy issues?
Sure, yeah, and privacy is just such a big topic now, and it was before AI, and now it's even more. So I think the first thing that I would say is to business people today is to make sure that you don't forget to have a privacy professional of some type on your team and on call, and that's because we're seeing privacy laws being updated around the world. So, back in the day, GDPR came out and that set the high water mark. And now the rest of the world is catching up on that. So near and dear to me in Canada, we used to be a leader in privacy when we came out with our privacy legislation back in the early 2000s. And now we're quite old school, so we're modernizing all of our laws as well. And we've seen that recently in Brazil. And, business people as well really need to keep an eye on the United States because each of those states has different privacy laws. So you could be dealing with technically, upwards of 50 different laws that you need to think of that way, all of which are being modernized without a sort of central focus. So that's the biggest thing. And then, typical things like coming to a website, it's not so simple anymore because a website isn't just for marketing anymore. We have analytics, like we talked about cookies, which whether they die or not, even if they do, there's going to be something that replaces them because data and big data is not going to go away. So it's really understanding what kind of information really identifies an individual, because that's the essence of what privacy is. So if it identifies an individual, and in particular, if it analyzes their behavior and allows you to make predictions or build a profile of that person, those are where red flags should be going off. And when I say red flag, it doesn't mean like pump the brakes hard and not go ahead with the business project, but it's thinking about how do we manage that data, what exactly are we collecting, how are we protecting against it, and an often forgotten thing is how can we identify what data we actually have about the person that's sensitive, so that if we do get a data rights request, whether that be, forget my information or do not sell my information, we can actually execute on that in the timelines.
Yeah, well, this is where I think this is where a lot of businesses get into a couple traps, because every marketing team out there wants to do as much possible, go as deep as possible to detail not only break down behavior and potential behavior and all the other things, but they would love to identify a person. They would love to know that it was Greg who likes blue shoes, not red shoes, and who likes, ankle socks versus high socks or whatever. And the more you can get into, but of course, this is where the balance comes in, where you want to do as much marketing as possible that is legally permissible within your region. You mentioned something about don't sell the data. And I think that this is where folks don't fully understand. There are cases where you are inherently giving away data without knowing, right? Where you have partners or you have even some add-ons to your website, or you're sharing things. For example, even if you're using a payment solution like, shop.com or, other payments, you're sharing some of the data. So you have to understand what data is also leaving your site.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and they're big topics, like as an example, payments processing, which is like such an interesting use case because, I don't know what it's like in your area of the world because you're always off on adventures and in some great spots, but or in the United States, but here in Canada, for example, there's times where I can use my credit card at whatever store it might be, go to a hardware store and buy something. And then I use that same card, let's say, at a clothing store. And without even telling either retailer who I am, like, hey, my name's Greg, I'm just tapping my credit card. It can say, hey, do you want the receipt sent to your email address, or do you want a printed copy? So that's something super benign and very, well, when I say benign, I mean it's convenient for us as the consumer.
Right.
But the question we need to ask is, if my credit card information is personal data, and if that's sensitive personal data, then how does a retailer know simply by me tapping on my card, where they're not even supposed to see the credit card, that I would like it sent to a specific email address that's associated with me? So then based on the email address being connected to that credit card, all of a sudden a payments processor might be able to start to paint a picture, like you said, of like what shoes do I like to purchase, even though in this case I went to the hardware store and now they know, well, Greg, after he buys some screws for his deck and some wood and such, he likes to go buy, I don't know, a blue t-shirt somewhere else. And these are things where as a consumer you might not really be thinking about it, but these are exactly the kinds of laws we're seeing coming out more and more to say technology has advanced so far that we need to catch up and look at protecting the data. And then, of course, you throw AI into the mix of all of that, where they can just do some
Yeah.
real deep analysis. It gets complicated very quickly.
Yeah, I'm going to get philosophical here for a second. I feel like we've gone from an era, and maybe there's some swing back to that era where most of the consumption was from local vendors where you had a relationship that they knew when you walked into a coffee shop that you wanted two sugars and milk or whatever. They knew who you were. They knew your order, especially if you were regular, to the point where we're getting de more separation from the endpoint of data, more separation from the relationship, but then we're still needing that data that we used to have through the relationship. And we're trying to compensate it by using technology. And sometimes that even goes overboard because you have companies that may not seem related that share that information with each other. And you get spending patterns. You actually, I was looking at a marketing study recently in a country that's outside of EU in Europe that doesn't apply to GDPR, and their companies were predicting people's paycheck cycles to be able to send them marketing the day after they got paid.
Oh, wow.
Particularly like groceries, or reminding, hey, now that you've got paid, go ahead and stock up on your groceries since you have money right now and you haven't spent it all. That feels a little more intrusive. It feels a little scarier in a sense. I want to jump back to something else you said, and I think this is an important one because I've got that question for several years now. And you mentioned particularly, even though not all of our listeners are in the United States, but quite a few are, but also quite a few folks do business in the United States. You mentioned, and it's what makes the United States so much fun in a way, that you have legislature you have to deal with in all 50 states. And people often ask me, well, if I am not in the United States as a business, does that still apply to me?
Mm-hmm.
If my location is in Alberta or my location is in the Gulf or my location, but I do business in the United States, how much should I care about what the different laws say for my website, for my online store, for my email business that touches people in those states in the US? Can you speak to that a
Yeah.
little bit?
Yeah, great question. And it makes me think back to my political science days when I was at university, and I took this new course with a fancy headline that was called I think topics in or trends in globalization, and this was this new term, globalization, um, and it's interesting to see, fast forward some 20 years later, especially in the world of privacy, we're really seeing like a globalization of laws in a lot of ways. So the technical term that you're talking about is we call it extraterritorial application of laws. So basically, I'm not in the U.S., but I'm doing business in the U.S., and all of a sudden I've got to think about whether I'm subject to them. So California is a great example. There's certain thresholds where if you meet any of them, no matter where you're located, if you're doing business in California, then you're subject to that privacy law. So it can be like, for example, one of the thresholds is 100,000 data subjects. So maybe that's 100,000 individuals that you're collecting data about. It could be devices as well. So maybe an individual plus a device that could maybe count for two. So even though 100,000 sounds pretty high for an active website in a state with that population, it's not hard to get to that threshold. And so even though you're, maybe located in a place like Vietnam or Canada, yeah, absolutely, those laws could be applicable to you. And talking about the globalization of laws, like what we're seeing is a standardization that's happening now that I alluded to it earlier in the call here, but GDPR set that high watermark. And so now that's become the standard worldwide, and to various degrees, we can get technical and say GDPR is a rights-based regime or privacy law versus other areas might be more consent-based like we have in Canada. But really what we're getting at is basically smoothing out the differences in laws, which is helpful in one sense, but at the same time, we get more and more complicated. And so, yeah, it's something that's important for people to look out for.
And I appreciate the fact that there are thresholds because obviously, if you're just a startup, then maybe you don't have to stress about every single detail of the California privacy regulation because it's more complex than, let's say, GDPR. But I remember when we were working on a project in the Philippines and they just implemented GDPR plus, they called it. And all of a sudden we're like, oh shoot, we got to actually adjust for that. So we had to think through, do we need to have different versions of our site that we're building, right, for the client? Is there a version that logs on, when you hit this particular geographic property versus this geographic property? And then you get into all kinds of fun things about, if people use VPNs or people use other things that involve that, it gets really fun and messy. Okay, one more quick question, because we're dealing with geography and things to think about when creating your product or your site. And then I want to get into some IP stuff, and then we'll jump into AI. But one more question is, you and I talked about this a few months back, which is the idea of the disabilities regulations, and we're getting into ADA, WDA, Canadian disabilities, European disabilities. I know that particularly the United States is a very litigious society, so people would jump on that, and there's some, I know, Greg, you're a good lawyer, but we know there's some lawyers who are less scrupulous. And so they try to find a reason to sue, especially in the United States, for no reason or for very limited reasons. How does a business that is doing business online protect itself when it comes to privacy regulation? Again, understanding that unlike GDPR, there's so many different standards and so many different levels.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes me think back to like talking about the non-technical side of things, like, spilled coffee lawsuits where, you order some coffee from McDonald's, wherever it is, and all of a sudden now you're in a $1 million lawsuit. And sometimes it feels the same with websites. So yeah, a few practical steps to take. One is kind of going back to the basics, making sure that you actually have a decent set of terms of use on your website. So although they become so boilerplate, and I would never advise copying and pasting simply from another website, but I mean, they have become quite boilerplate almost to that point. Something simple as saying that the laws, in this case, maybe the laws of Canada apply to the use of the website. So now by doing that, we're creating a contract between the website visitor and the business. And we've, just by making that simple step of saying, hey, we all agree that Canada's laws are going to apply, and maybe even get specific, like Alberta's laws are going to apply, then all of a sudden we are narrowing the field of those potential either disability and access laws for websites or whatever else it might be. So that's step one. And then step two, I'd say, is again going back to making sure that when you're putting up a new website or engaging in a new technological project, just to have your privacy professional take a look at it. And that might be your privacy officer inside your organization, or it might be somebody like me that you hire to take a look at it. But just understanding what the scope of risk is 90% of the battle.
And I would even throw in one more time to do that. It's not just when you're launching a website. I would say as you see your business scale up and grow, as you mentioned, there's those thresholds, but I think you're potentially impacting different audiences and doing, we always recommend doing a security audit every, year at least, sometimes every 6 months. I think doing a legal audit or a privacy audit or a ADA compliance audit is a good thing to kind of build into your systems, even if it is, nope, nothing changed, we're good to go. And that took 15 minutes and everything's fine. But, I hate to use the phrase better safe than sorry. Sometimes you can remove headaches by putting those in and show due diligence, even if it gets to a legal situation, right? And you show, hey, we've tried to do everything by the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's not really exciting stuff, all this privacy stuff on the surface. But, like one thing I tell my clients all the time is exactly what you said is, annually, let's get on a phone call and talk through what changes we've made to our tech stack. How are we using data now? And importantly, are we sharing it with any different categories of partners that we hadn't thought about before? And in this case, like thinking of your lawyer, and this is a bit of a shameless plug for my profession and what I do, but think of us as your partner in it. Sometimes I have to remind my clients, especially ones that are more in the startup phase, that a lawyer isn't the same as like a law enforcement agent or a police officer. We're not looking for the ways that you're offside so that we can report you to somebody. We're there to really find out, hey, like, are we offside? What's the problem here? How do we solve it? And do that in a confidential conversation so we can really get into it and fix it before it becomes an issue for you.
Yeah, I think a lot of it dealing with legal professionals, I think is the same as security professionals. Is you're doing a risk assessment, right? You're always going to ask a question. Okay, so we're going to do this. What risks are we taking? I don't think there's a perfect website in the world that meets every single criteria of every single privacy law and every single disability law, because I think some of them even contradict each other. So at some point you're going to go, well, yes, we do not meet that law requirement of the law in Tuvalu. Well, guess what? We don't have any customers in Tuvalu, and we're not likely to go market in Tuvalu. Perhaps we're okay there, right? So, I remember back in the day, this is aging me for sure, is that people were buying up every domain name possible to protect their company, and they were buying domain in every single country. And I remember giving somebody advice saying, you're wasting a lot of time and money worrying about things that cannot happen, but yet you should be doing something to take care of it. Well, you mentioned something, and I'll piggyback on this one now, is you mentioned something about boilerplates. And the legal industry obviously has evolved leaps and bounds in technology. Obviously, you have resources that came out from LegalZoom and many others that have made things easier for people to create those boilerplate things. In fact, it kind of led you to create Made It Legal because of that. Kind of walk me through what made you want to do a startup, not just because you're insane and you need more work, but what need do you feel like you were addressing by creating Made It Legal?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, my personal insanity of trying to do that on top of running a law practice aside, it was a few things. So I got really involved in the startup community and just loved it. Like the energy behind it, and just the fact that you could wear a t-shirt to a meeting rather than a three-piece suit felt great. So that was kind of my entry point. But when I got into it, I saw a really common problem is that legal would often be ignored until the last possible moment because it costs so much. And so it really is that simple where lawyers and legal services, we've almost priced ourselves out of the market. And I think we've done a disservice to a lot of people that way. And I also think we've done a disservice to ourselves as lawyers too, because I really do love what I do, but there are it's a job too where I don't always like doing the simple boilerplate stuff over and over again either. I would rather focus my attention on strategic legal advice and really helping to negotiate a deal and getting big things done. So then I thought, well, why not marry legal services with tech, where we can get the tech to do the heavy lifting? So now if we create tech, whether it's a SaaS solution or AI or whatever the technology of the day is, but if we can get that to say write somewhere between 80% to 90% or 99% of the contract in a way that the client needs in a really good, high quality way, then my work as a lawyer is focused on the last mile where I can deliver that strategic business advice. I've now also right-sized the legal bill and the legal spend for my client because now a technological solution has done that heavy lifting. And so rather than saying 5 hours at $400 an hour or $500 an hour, now it's a subscription based, maybe it's $50 a month or $100 a month, whatever the tier is. And you get a tech solution that writes that for you. So now anyways, you're going from maybe a $5,000 bill down to maybe $500. Which is a huge win for the client. It's a win for me because I focus on the brainier stuff that I'd like to do anyways, and where I can actually deliver some real value. So in that way, I'm thinking of it as like a way that we can democratize law for startups and businesses. And
Yeah, and I think that there's a common theme where, sorry, I was thinking there's a common theme overall when we go with technology solutions is we're not trying to replace the humans, but we're trying to remove the routine stuff that's being done redundantly over and over again, and then add the human touch on top of that. I remember when you and I talked, even at your early phases, is having that extra step available of, well, you've put it together, but you're still not sure, or it's a little bit more complex. Then having somebody review it as any content creators ever dealt with it, it is much harder to create the basics than it is to edit. Because editing, you're off of something. You're not dealing in that ether in the vacuum. All right. So here's your 2024 question. If you were starting it today, knowing that AI exists, what would you be doing differently? And then how are you evolving Made It Legal with AI in mind?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, we spoke about that one at length offline too, before getting on today's call. It's such an interesting time period because, if I were to be an articling student, which is, you go through law school and then before you're a full-fledged lawyer, in most places, you have to do a year of what we call articling. It's basically an apprenticeship. So if I think back to whenever that was, I'm dating myself here, but I think that was 2009 that I was articling. Um, like we were still on Blackberries back then, to put it in context. But it'd be really difficult because a lot of the early stage work that you do as a lawyer can and will be replaced by AI. I don't think that's right now. But how far away is it? Is it 3 years, 5 years? I'm not entirely sure, but I know it's not 10 years away. It would be my guess. So it's coming up fast.
The pace is high. Yeah.
Yeah, pace is high. So I would be focusing more on how do I become the person that trains the tech or does the quality control on the tech? Or specifically with Made It Legal in mind, how do I become the owner of the technological solution now? So with Made It Legal specifically, we're a SaaS solution right now. And the way I look at it is we have, how can I put this? The beginning of our value journey is we have a client, we ask them, what kind of contracts do you need? And then they can pick a contract. Maybe they need an employment contract. And then we interview them using tech to get to know their business. And then we use all of their answers and we package them up into this nice little contract that they can download and use instantly. Right now we're using SaaS for that, a software solution. But the black box, so that's a black box. My customers don't know the code behind, to make it on here, they don't know the code behind the engine here. And so now we can swap out a simpler SaaS solution with a high-powered AI solution. So we're not really changing the value we're delivering. We're still delivering high-quality contracts made in a simpler way with the support of a real human when you need it. But now we're layering in AI. What I like about AI is it can do things like the simple solution of writing the contract, but it also does a whole lot more where we can start delivering insights to our customers. And this is a great future path that we're working on and Made It Legal right now. So on top of saying, hey, make a confidentiality agreement, now you can ask the AI to say, show me all the contracts where I've agreed to confidentiality and how long that was for. So whether it was 3 years or 5 years. And maybe we can tell you, you can ask it, for example, what contracts do I have expiring over the next 3 years? Or what's the total dollar value of my contracts? And then all of a sudden we can build out really nice dashboards and metrics and give you a snapshot of your business. Which is going way beyond just a simple solution of writing a contract. But now we're taking your contracts and we're giving you real world data that you can start using to optimize your business. So this is where I think AI and law tech just really start to overlap into a great solution.
Yeah, I think it's powerful. I mean, even going back to the origins, and essentially what you were doing is you were, to put it rudely and bluntly, you were creating a prompting system, right? We all know today, there's companies that make their money selling preset prompts for AI. I think that's a transient business. I think it's going to go away in a while because sooner or later we're going to ask AI to create a better prompt for AI, and I think it's already happening. But I think what you're building isn't, before AI, a prompting system to get people to give you the best answers possible, right? Instead of just saying, tell me everything you need about a contract. We do the same thing in tech. Part of our job is to get you to give us enough data so we can give you an estimation and prepare what tools you need technologically, right? Do you need this caching system? Do you need this? Do you need that? Well, may not, right? So I think, what you were doing, but now you can evolve and add AI elements to the prompting. But I love the fact that you're also thinking beyond that and allowing people to integrate, okay, what else do I need to be working and thinking ahead? Because so much of what we do in business is reactive, right? And I think it is great to be able to be proactive and thinking from the legal overlap with business and be proactive, like, hey, what contracts are expiring or what laws have changed that I need to update these particular contracts, and let AI do the legwork with the, as you mentioned before, human quality control on top of that. You mentioned when we were talking offline about the quality of what AI creates without human control. Can you kind of speak to that? How great AI is creating documents right now?
Yeah. Yeah. And one comes to mind, and we talked a little bit about it. So, like as an example, talking about the prompt side of things, like that is so important with AI for now. And I totally agree with you. At some point, we'll have AIs that prompt AIs, and who knows what rabbit hole we're down when we start doing that. But as an example, I had a request from a client to create an engagement letter that we could use with some investment bankers overseas. So we were looking at doing some deals in parts of the world where investment bankers, like lawyers, were a virus that's appeared everywhere all over the planet, but in certain areas. There's more contractual discipline, shall we say, than others. And what I mean by that is, if you're dealing with an investment banker in Canada or North America, United States, other places, chances are they have a very good engagement letter that's very friendly to them. Other parts of the world, it's a little bit more less formal, where it's a bit more on a handshake deal, and you just kind of get started. And what my client wanted was to make sure we had a contract in place. So I thought, this is a great opportunity to try out an AI tool that I've been using and see how well it did with just creating an engagement letter for investment banking in some part of the world. So what I got back was a very well written agreement from a grammatical standpoint and even from a technical standpoint. So all the section references were perfect. Defined terms were great. It was a really nicely done, polished agreement. But as I went into it, there are certain clauses in there that would say, like, for example, if my client hires this investment banker, we're not allowed to use any other investment banker anywhere else in the world. And if we do, we have to pay a break fee to that investment banker of X percent of the total contractual, or sort of the total transactional value. So, if we're doing an acquisition of, say, a $10 million target company, and now we've got to pay a 5% break fee because we decide not to use an investment banker anymore, that's not great. As the human, quality control and lawyer on that, I can look at that and say, well, that's obviously not supposed to be in there. Break fees are usually paid to the target company if we don't go ahead with the deal. Yeah, that's the normal context. So if we're looking to acquire a company, we've done months of due diligence, and then we say, hey, we're out. Well, now they've lost an opportunity to sell to somebody else, and so there's a break fee. So I can look at this and say, hey, AI, I know where you're going with this, and I know you can see this term in all sorts of M&A contracts that you looked at, but I'm talking about specifically hiring an investment banker to serve me and provide me with advice, and I really don't need to be paying a break fee to that investment banker. So,
Yeah.
this is the problem I see with AI right now is it's super smart, but it doesn't totally understand the context all the time. So that's where you need that human oversight.
Yeah, I find this a theme in every conversation. We had a conversation with a real estate startup and talks about not understanding the human emotions that are not logical sometimes, or not understanding the some of the contextual things that you mentioned. But I love the fact that we seem to constantly come back to this in every single conversation about AI. Is it's great. It gives a great starting point. It saves us time. It allows us to automate things, allows us to speed things up, gives us a canvas to start with, gives us ideas to work with. But we need that human oversight to add our experience, add our emotions, and add the context that may not be relevant. And again, I think AI is going to continue to evolve and is going to get better at contextualizing. But I feel like we're several years away from set it and forget it. At least I don't. I'm not ready personally, and I'm not going to lead a company that is going to be set it and forget it. Let AI deliver front ready content.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want us to get into one last topic here. And this is the one that I think is the funniest and the hairiest and the most interesting one, is this idea of intellectual property, especially when it comes to AI right now. So we all know AI can do some really fun things like create visual images. And we get into situations of, is it really new content? Is it sampling? Where does it come to? If I have a logo created by AI, am I safe enough, right? Like if I'm a startup business, or, I coach a team and I need a new logo and I have AI created, am I good to go? Or do I need to worry about, did it actually just steal somebody's logo? Did it steal somebody's art and create a logo out of it? What are your top 2 or 3 concerns or things people need to be aware of when dealing with AI and intellectual property, whether it's visual, audio, content, so on?
Yeah. Yeah, great question and super timely. So first point is, just because you've used an AI doesn't mean that you're immune from liability of the output. So you're absolutely right. We're seeing this a lot in like logo and graphic design, really in all areas, but that one comes to mind because there's a few high profile cases out there right now. So again, like, use the AI tool. Like, I don't want to sound anti-AI, because I'm actually really optimistic on what it can do for us. And humor, this might be some humor, but if it really does lead to the end of the world, then, I mean, we're going to get there at some point anyway. So we might as well be living in exciting times, I guess. But, so use the AI tool. In this case, let's talk about logos. Go get your logo made, but before you publish it, do some sort of quality control check and say, like, hey, is this too similar to, Nike's logo or somebody else's logo? So you can do that through a human review, or even perhaps use there are AI tools out there that are designed for this sort of thing, where you can upload it and say, hey, like, show me anything out there that's similar as well. So even use the AI tool to do the quality control check. So that'd be point one, because I think that is your first line of defense, is making sure that you're not overstepping on intellectual property rights of somebody else. Second, and this is a hard one to do, and I'll try to explain why, but you can look at the contracts that you have with your AI provider. So, if you're using Copilot from Microsoft or some of the other big ones, like, they all come with terms of service, even if it's OpenAI. So those terms of service will have in there allocation of liability. So this is where you got to watch out, because especially as a smaller player, if you're a smaller business, you have very little negotiation power. And there's so much demand for these AI tools that negotiating the terms can be really difficult. But what you want to watch out for there is, specifically, if you're looking at some of the bigger players, they'll say that they're not liable for any of the outputs, or whether those infringe intellectual property rights, and then they'll cap their liability, usually at some multiple of the subscription fees that you've paid, or some low amount. So maybe it's an ultimate maximum of even something like $1,000 I've seen. If you're in a position to negotiate that, then you should. And what you should do is have like a different allocation of risk there. So maybe you're looking to the AI provider to make you whole if the output does infringe intellectual property rights. That's a tall ask. You're probably not going to get that, but maybe as a second best, what you can get in there is say that if you're looped into a general class action lawsuit that says that AI has been trained up on somebody else's intellectual property and you've benefited from that, the AI platform and provider is going to, what lawyers say in fancy terms, they're going to indemnify you for that loss, which means they'll defend you and pay for your damages. So we already see this sort of term in SaaS all the time. So in almost every market sort of SaaS terms of service, you'll see in there a clause that says, hey, if we as the SaaS provider have infringed somebody's intellectual property rights in providing this technology for you, then we'll defend you. We're not there yet on AI in terms of the boilerplate or standard terms you'll see in front of you, but if you can nudge them that way, then perfect. And then the third line of defense is check your insurance policies. It's something that we often forget about, but uh, most policies will have some kind of a term that may actually cover you for intellectual property infringement by using an AI tool. So, check that policy, talk to your insurance broker, and see what sort of cyber coverage you have as that third line of defense if you get looped into something.
Wow. Hey, one more question on, dealing with AI companies, particularly. We talk about AI is great at analyzing data, right? But we also know, particularly, I noticed I'm one of those people, and you trained me well, and a few other lawyers I've dealt with. I actually try to read terms of service. Um, and I noticed in the OpenAI, ChatGPT one is that they have a right to use the data for analysis and other things. So if I'm uploading customer data and I'm trying to analyze, how many of my customers in a particular zip code, or how many of my customers, do these purchases, how do I know, that this data will not be used for their own purposes, or, I'm not even talking about the specific prompts I'm looking questions and so on and so forth, but particularly if I'm uploading data sets, if I'm uploading spreadsheets or I'm uploading things for it to analyze, what are the things I need to be aware of, or how do I need to protect myself when using these tools for analysis?
Yeah, yeah, spot on. So there's two things that I'd say that should be top of mind. So one is, like you said, looking at those terms of service and seeing what tier you're in. So if you're in like a lower cost tier for that AI solution, or some sort of a freemium model, then very likely the terms in there will say, just as you said, that anything that you upload can be used to train the AI and improve the products and services. But if you're on a higher subscription tier, we're starting to see more and more data governance terms being in there, where it said that your data is siloed. It's used to provide the service to you and you only, and it can't be used to train up the AI. Or if it is used to train the AI, then there's specific standards of anonymization to make sure that your data cannot be reassociated with either your business or your own customers. And that goes down a whole other rabbit hole of what it means to be truly anonymized data, and whether that's even possible in today's world.
Right.
But talking about what we were talking about in the previous question, then you look at the data governance will typically have some indemnifications in there, because you're paying for that higher subscription tier, so there's a different allocation of risk and liability. So that's one thing to look at. But also, whatever terms you're agreeing to for your AI in terms of the permissions on training the technology on data sets, you have to flow those terms down to your own customers. So if you've agreed with an AI provider that, yes, all my data can be used to train it, then you need to make sure that your agreements with your customers also have that term to say, hey, customer, you're consenting to me using your data with an AI and also training it on that. So don't forget to flow everything down, which is not good news for the consumer often, but everything's got to flow downhill until it hits somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder for folks. I think it's important to continue that flow of communication. And, again, we're making choices. We can choose to use a different AI tool, or we can choose to not upload a full set of data and limit what's exposed, right? I can pre-anonymize some of the data and strip out some of the information that's personalized for the customer, and do a broader set analysis or a limited set analysis, as opposed to throwing it up there and giving access and say, here, do as you will. And I think as you're making choices for your tools, looking at those data governance and policies and everything else, even if it costs you more, it may save you money in the long run, to pay that higher subscription to get more custom terms. And I also think we're going to see a lot more fine point, adjustable controls when we get into, should we say, private AIs or semi-private AIs, where you can take the engine but create your own rules within that and keep your data sets in your own cloud box and your own, essentially going from black box stuff to, let's say, gray box, and being able to do some of the stuff there. And I think we're going to continue seeing evolution, because I think the understanding of training for our purposes is also going to be a factor, because the way you train AI may be different from the way somebody in the US might train AI. I think we're going to get deeper and deeper rabbit holes, as you said, in all these
Mhm.
ways that are being trained up. Okay, well, as we're wrapping up, I give every guest a chance at the end to share something in the way they're trying to make the world better, or anything that makes a difference in your life that you want to share. Kind of give you a final word here for the day.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thank you for that. We talked a little bit about made it legal already, and I think I would include that in the bucket of trying to make the world a better place. The philosophy we have at Made It Legal is we think of ourselves as business freedom fighters. And that's a cultural point that I'm really trying to instill in the organization of we want to empower businesses to go do really cool things. And the way that we can do that is to take the legal off their plate and take care of that for them. And I really love what we're trying to do, and whether it's through an AI side of things or real human lawyer services, I think there's a lot of ways that we can make law not a pain point in something that businesses can really value, and we can make their business better for it. So we have, I hope, really great things ahead. Really great things with AI too, and we'll see where, like we said, where the rabbit hole goes.
Well, thank you for jumping into the multiple rabbit holes with us today. For everybody else, this is Greg from Made It Legal. We'll have links to his site in the show notes as always. And please come back to listen to future episodes. If you're an AI junkie, we have at least 5 or 6 different episodes that touch on it, including one with Andrew, who is an AI researcher who can demystify some of the AI terminology that we even covered today. If you need more of that, that episode may be helpful. But thank you once again, and I hope everybody has a great day.